expectations of how they're supposed to work. Like, you said with the employee, if other employees see that there's someone there that's not pulling their weight, they're going to think, oh, well, I guess this is what management's okay with. So then why do I need to put in the extra work? Why do I need to go above and beyond?
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast. Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going fantastically, Josh. How are you?
Doing well. Question for you.
All right.
This is one of those questions I think I know the answer to. I'm going to ask it anyway because it's fun. Do you think there is any correlation between the employee experience and the guest or customer experience, or are they just two totally separate things that just live on their own and never interact with each other?
They are so separate. Like one is on Gilligan's Island and one is on Survivor Island. And never shall the two meet or interact.
Agreed. And that concludes today's episode.
So, of course, they are related in many, many ways. Today, we get to hear a little bit more about how they're related. But to answer your question, yes, I absolutely think they're related. And I think that they inform each other, right? A lot of times we talk about the employee experience, that's going to determine the customer experience or the guest experience. But I also feel like there's a feedback loop that maybe we don't talk about as often, where the guest experience can then feedback and impact the employee experience, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I think there's a kind of a circular motion with that conversation.
I agree. I completely agree. And we get into some interesting topics today. And for those who are new to the Attraction Pros podcast, this specific topic is something you and I have discussed at length throughout multiple episodes and have touched on key points of it. We've led conference sessions. We've led full day workshops. We've led full 2-day workshops just on the intersection of the guest and employee experience. And I do feel like we actually touched on some areas that I don't think we've actually reached out yet. So that's what made this conversation with Jill really exciting, particularly as you talk about kind of the customer experience and that feedback loop going back to the employee experience. Your employees are one of the greatest sources of guest feedback because they purely are observing, they are collecting it in real time. And these might be pieces of feedback that may not show up in surveys or in mystery shops or in online reviews because they're just happening in the moment, or they're coming from the lens of the team member who has this frontline view of the guest experience that they have the ability to report that back to management and then be able to see the changes. And then as they see the changes, the guest satisfaction improves because there's improvements made to the guest experience. But think about that employee as well. And maybe that group of team members that said, hey, here's an issue that we're regularly seeing. And when management embraces that and says, oh, let's actually take this on. And then the credit goes back to that employee or those employees who brought that up. That I think now bounces then back and forth between now they're even more motivated to deliver a fantastic guest experience, thus elevating satisfaction overall and creating the perfect utopia of guest and employee experience where everybody's happy all the time.
So you know what I think you need? I think you need a microphone, whether it's hooked up or not, so that you can just mic drop. Boom.
That's true. I've got one. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not going to drop the Blue Yeti mic that I have in my closet, but yeah.
No, not a good
Right.
one.
I need just just an old hand mic. Yeah.
But all of those things you just said really encapsulate a lot of the things that we got to talk to Jill Raff today about, because she is the CEO and founder of the Jill Raff Group, and she really advises people on that employee experience and customer experience relationship. And it's not two islands that are very, very far apart. They are absolutely next to each other. They are related to one another, and they, like you just said, they impact each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk all about, we go into I would say a wide range of topics, particularly just under this umbrella. We talk about expectations, which is expectations from the guest, it's expectation from the team member, and then there's expectations from leadership of the team member in delivering that experience. So we talk about managing expectations kind of in a way that really cohesively brings all those together.
With a subsection of that being communication, right? And so it's kind of the umbrella on top, but also it comes back around underneath. And how important
under.
I like that. Yeah, that's a good one. But just how important communication is to the management of expectations, but also the fulfillment or execution of those expectations.
We also talk about screening for values. One of the challenges I hear all the time from the organizations I work with is they say there's the desperation hire. We recorded a whole mini episode, a mini-sode on avoiding the desperation hire, and we get to hear Jill's take on that and making sure that we're going to talk about what's the lesser of two evils of are you operating at lower capacity because you're not jeopardizing your standards, or you're filling in positions with people who aren't an organizational fit. Well, I won't give away what was sort of concluded from that, but it was just a fascinating conversation to have in terms of screening employees for value so that they are a right fit and not impacting the operational flow, operational efficiency.
Yeah. And Jill also talks a little bit about the difference between reacting and responding, which I thought was really fascinating in terms of, especially from a business standpoint, are you reacting to something? And that's got, its pros and cons, but also there was the response that, again, don't want to give too much away, but that might be the more measured way to look at a particular situation. So with all that, should we get to this interview with Jill?
We absolutely should. Hey, Jill, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. We are so excited to talk to you today. How are you?
I am awesome. Great to be with y'all. Thank you.
Absolutely. It is our pleasure. We're so excited to talk to you because Matt and I, we often talk about the intersection between the guest and employee experience and how one leads into the other, and how in many cases they're actually the same thing because we're just in the people to people business no matter what. So we're really excited to learn even more about that from you today. So to kick this off, can you tell us all about yourself and tell us about what you do?
Sure. Well, I am Jill Raff. I am the EX to CX advisor, speaker, consultant. I'm a columnist for Nation's Restaurant News. And it's all about people, as you just said. As an EX to CX expert, my EX to CX, the important thing there is employee experience to customer experience. I believe strongly that we work from the inside out, and that's starting with your internal customers, your employees, and creating a great experience for them so they actually become your company's best advocates and customer magnets. I work with companies to help them build that culture from the inside out so that they're attracting and retaining the right people based on alignment with their company's core values. And in doing so, they really become the employer of choice. They become the company that people want to work for.
Well, Jill, you are speaking our language, and this is going to be so cool to talk to you about this. But I'd like to go back a little bit. When did it become apparent to you in your career that the customer experience was really based on that employee experience, and that there was work to be done around that to help organizations kind of figure that out for themselves?
That's a great question. You know what? There's an expression like the sharpest knife can't carve its own handle, right? Basically, you can't see the water from the fish can't see the water from, because it's all right there. It's who you are. It's what you know. It's what you live. That was kind of my situation, because I grew up in the McDonald's franchise from the very early days. My parents were owner operators of store number 150 in 1959. And I wasn't born yet, but I literally grew up in this developing company that no one had any clue would become the number one global hamburger franchise. But seeing that, witnessing that, working in that, working my way through in every part of the business, seeing how my father interacted with his managers and with his crew all these years, decades later, and I lost my dad almost 3 decades ago. To meet people and speak to people who worked for him and tell me verbatim conversations that they had and how it impacted their life, I realized, looking back, how I had a front row seat in the fortune of growing up, experiencing how other people experienced him as the owner and as the top lead manager, and how that employee experience kept them with him all these years, kept him all these years later, still telling me these amazing stories that changed their life, both professionally and values and skills that they took through professionally. And I was actually speaking with another CX expert, my buddy Dennis Wakabayashi, and we were talking about doing a collaboration. And I was showing him, I shared my screen to show him some of the work that I did. And he's like, Jill, you are like the EX queen. This was during early days of COVID. He's like, do you realize no one's talking about employee experience? This is your baby. Like, this is how you get to CX, but no one else is doing that. And I was like, what? Seriously? Like, it was just common sense to me. And so it really took someone else looking in for me to realize where my own values and kind of direction came from.
Interesting.
That's so fascinating. Yeah. And I would love to actually even sort of connect the dots and kind of get the in between. There's everything that you learned from your father and from the McDonald's franchise, and then everything you do today. How have you implemented that throughout your career, throughout your experience and your management and your leadership styles as well?
Well, I've kind of had this twisty, turvy path. I've had multiple careers across different industries. And I'll sum it up as quickly as possible, but a lot of people don't understand how my first career was a fashion designer. I was a knitwear specialist. I worked in that industry for years. It took me to different countries. And then I was a food stylist. I always loved food. I went to Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. So I had the technical culinary training, but also the understanding from growing up in the industry, a different application of it, and had the really huge fortune of working in a one-star, did a stage in the one-star Michelin in Italy, in Harrod's pastry kitchen. So I'm really like Harrod, not Harrod's. I'm really from McDonald's to Michelin in terms of the experience. And then I was the food styling. And then I'm even a licensed real estate agent, was licensed dual state in New York and Texas. And people are like, well, Jill, like, it's so disconnected. And I'm like, no, actually it was an organic flow, and it was a transition of skills bringing forward to the next. But I realized, looking back, that every one of those career paths, I was thinking about the end customer. I had to be thinking about the cost, about where they lived, and like with clothing, like, right, different styles, the age group, what was the brand promise, the brand image, how do we merge all those things together? I determined my factories, the pricing, like all of these little elements. I had to be thinking about what was the customer's how are they going to experience what the work was that I did. Same thing with food styling. So I had a cover of Food and Wine magazine, cookbooks, TV Today show, GMA morning shows, you name it, magazines, cookbooks, food packaging, Godiva. How was the customer going to receive the work that I did? How are they going to experience it? And how would it influence them to purchase that cookbook, the Godiva chocolates, or whatever it was that I was working on. And so when I sat down, and really this work that I do now was an amalgamation of all that and an evolution, I realized that with my hiring, for example, so in fashion design, I hired assistants and people to work with me. And I one of the things that I talk about and teach now is about how to not do warm body hiring, but to really hire according to your core values, and bringing people on who are aligned with you, not just based on their experience, not just because you like them. And it's like, oh, they're really interesting. Yeah, well, you need to hire people not just that you like and you might want to go to dinner with, but like, how are they in alignment with you in terms of the work that you want to do, and the work ethic that I grew up with certainly became a part of that. So I think it comes down to those values and how we implement that, and to share that, whether it's the work ethic, whether it's hiring principles. There's so many things along the way that I realized that I got from my foundation.
Yeah. Well, Jill, excuse me, one of the things I'd like to dive into is that employee experience, and certainly how it impacts the customer experience. And you just mentioned, not doing the warm body hiring and to hire according to your values. And, I think those are great strategies for people. But I'm also curious, from your perspective, what do people get wrong when it comes to employee experience?
What do they get wrong? I think where things go wrong is there is a lack of communication, effective communication channels. I think people often say, well, I'm listening, and they may be listening, but are they really hearing what their employees have to say? Their employees are front line with their customers. They are the greatest source of information. And I think so often where companies really go wrong is not giving their employees the voice, not giving them the opportunities to express not only how they feel and what their experience is working for the company, how is their relationship, and how are things set up with the management. I mean, people always say people leave a company because of their managers, bad managers, not the company. Are we losing really great people because there's bad management, and they're not maybe in alignment with your values, and they're not leading the way you would like them to lead? So I think we're not listening to our people from all of those sources. But I think in addition, we're not tapping into this huge wealth of information from the customers, right? Like, let's get more feedback every day. What are you hearing on the front lines? What works for them? What did they like? What did they not like? What are we missing? What do they want that we don't have? And really tailor those to each industry, to each business, whatever it is.
So interesting you say that. I've been doing a number of training workshops lately, and I'll ask all the frontline team members in the workshops. I'll say, what are some of the most common complaints that you get from guests? And it's so interesting to actually compile them, and then to kind of see you're getting aggregate feedback kind of in some of the ways that maybe they wouldn't otherwise be getting it, even if they're sending out surveys or looking at reviews or things like that, that some of the leadership is saying like, oh, I didn't realize this was as big of an issue, but now so many people altogether, wrote this down, on their sheet individually as this is one of the most common complaints that you're getting. So I'm curious, as far as maybe what are some of the best ways to leverage your employees, your team members, to collect that guest feedback, and then really then where it goes from there through the flow of now we're implementing these changes. And at the same time, giving a lot of that credit back to the employees of, we're making these changes because of the work that you've done to collect, to report back on these issues.
100%. And I think I'm going to start at the end and work backwards, because
it was a multifaceted question.
Yeah, there was a lot there.
Yeah.
My brain's going,
Yeah.
yes, bingo.
Sorry.
I think I'm going to start at the end, because I think what goes so far and is really underestimated is attributing the success to your people. letting people know you are responsible for our growth. You are responsible for our success or potentially our failure, right? Like, so take what they've given you, take their input, take their enthusiasm, their pride, their excitement, reward them for that, acknowledge them for that. And when people, it's the same thing like when you have children and you want them to eat foods that they're really picky and they don't want to eat. Well, the advice there is always involve them in the decision making, involve them in the cooking, and suddenly they're going to be more open to try it. Why? Because they've been personally invested in what that is. And I think it's a parallel analogy that when you bring your people in on the decision making, then they're going to be invested in the success of that. So that, you know, for sure that, and that just leads me to another just kind of side note, and you can bring me back because I have a bad habit of doing this. But when I'm thinking about, you know, all of the feedback, I think about the diversity of feedback and how crucial that is. So I just finished my last article. So the column I mentioned in the beginning, I write for Nation's Restaurant News. It's called Ask Jill, Develop Your Company Culture. And the last one that I just wrote about, there was a section in there. It was talking about the biggest challenges of how to build and maintain a company culture. A positive company culture was the question put forth to me. And so one of the elements I talked about was diversity and inclusion. And the most exciting thing about that is when you're asking your people for feedback, it's going to be richer. It's going to be broader and more inclusive if you've got a diversity of employees. And so I even quoted Mark Levitt, who's with the Enlightened Hospitality Group, Danny Meyer's group. And he was telling me that they have 65% of people who are women are underrepresented in the companies that they're invested in. And so, and as is their own team. And because of that, they have this incredible, rich base of ideas and input and how they do things, because everyone comes with different experiences, different parents, different cultures, different upbringings. And if you have that, think of the wealth. It's like soil that's rich with micro, I don't know all the word that, but the microorganisms, right? And how much better that is than if we had a solo kind of, source of everybody thinking the same, coming from the same background, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that diversity, I just want to throw that out there too, because in terms of getting that feedback from your people, the more diverse it is, I think the more, the richer your company will be as a result of it, and grow faster. And you're going to be appealing to your customers, your customer base broader, because you're going to have people see themselves in your company, right? They're represented there.
So Jill, one of the things I'd like to dive into when you talk about gathering all that feedback, I think it's amazing to be able to get that diversity of feedback and the wealth of all that information. But I think for some people that could be overwhelming because they've got all this information, right? And then they've got to distill that down into, now what actions do I take? And I know from some of the organizations I've worked with that overwhelm sometimes turns into no action. So what is your advice or your thought process about, okay, you've got all that information, now what do we do with it?
Fantastic question, because I think so often companies gather the data, they do whatever assessments and hire whatever organizations to do it. And then they're like, okay, check the box, we did that. But they don't then do anything with the results, the information. And of course, it means nothing unless you take action on it. It can be overwhelming. A lot of data is mind-blowing sometimes. And I think that having an external person, quite frankly, is the easiest way to sift through it, because they're not coming in with all the other problems going on. They're not emotionally attached. they're invested in your success, but they're not emotionally attached to the goings on every single day and the fires being put out and, you know, the chatter of whatever's going on within the company. And I think if you have an outside source who understands the business and understands what the customers want, can look at this information, sit down together and say, okay, where is it you would like to be? Look at this information. Does this make sense to you? And if they say, no, it doesn't at all, then say, okay, well, let's figure out why, because either they're disillusioned, right? They think something's happened that isn't, or if they don't get it, they're like, well, we're trying to do these initiatives or this system or whatever it is, then clearly it's the best information, and take it as such that this is a great source of information by which to then make changes so that we're meeting our goals for our employees and for our customers. And I think having someone to flesh that out with, I know one of my favorite things from my backgrounds, whether it was, you know, designing those collections as a fashion designer or working with a team on set of a food shoot, that's where similar skills, all those things apply. To me, it's the brainstorming. It's that creative energy of brainstorming and ideas and one building on the next. That's super exciting. And that will always lead you to a better result than if you sat down with a bunch of numbers or data or whatever it is, sitting isolated solo, or with the same people who are used to doing the same things the same way all the time. You know, more of the same is going to get you more of the same. You know, Einstein said, right, like definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting different results. So taking that information, get some outside fresh eyes and ears on it, let them understand and really dive into what you've done, where you want to go, look at the information together with the data, and then really, you know, go from there, figure out how do we take this information and implement the changes into the system, into the operations. It's not going to be a one-time fix. It's something that has to be integrated along the way with the operation so that those values, those changes, whatever it is that you want accomplished, is front of mind all the time.
Yeah.
Mhm. Jill, I would like to go back to one of the things that we mentioned a little earlier, and you talked about the warm bodies, or, you know, I hear people call it the desperation hire or the pulse test, and this is something Matt and I have talked about, you know, sometimes as well. And I, you know, in in the attractions and probably in all service industries, we see this happen a lot because there's the immediate operational need for a human being to fill a position. And sometimes if it's that desperation hire, then they might bypass that cultural fit in the interest of continuing to operate and say, you know, operating with the wrong person, perhaps the mindset might be operating with the wrong person is better than not operating with, you know, at all. And I don't know if that's the right answer or not. It might be in some circumstances. It might not be in other circumstances. But curious as far as ways to avoid the desperation hire or that kind of warm body need. But when people need to be, you know, kind of implemented and ramped up immediately. And just
Yeah.
schedule.
The same problem in restaurants, I think, in all hospitality whatsoever. People might not like this answer because it takes time and everyone wants a quick fix. And I think the way to resolve it, and from companies that I've spoken with who are not having these problems, is because as they're hiring, they really make sure that whoever they bring along and bring on does have the same value, does have the same work ethic, does have the same ultimate goal, and sees themselves as a part of the bigger picture, that they're not someone coming in that wants to be the solo star and wants to get all the credit or be the one to always put forth the ideas or whatever it is, but it's a true collaboration. Now, obviously, if you're working with a company that's been established for a long time, you're going to have a mix of employees, some that might be aligned and some that are not. so the best that can be done, and of course it's always a case by case basis, so I have to speak broadly, and if I were to be speaking with someone who had a certain problem, then I would dive deep with them as to what that problem was, and we would work on the specifics that were unique to them, although I pretty much guarantee it wouldn't be really truly unique to them. Right. But in the moment with what they're dealing with is what I mean by that, right? And I think the key really is to just over time to continue to try to, I think, to continue to try to have people who are only aligned, or people who are in your leadership that are 100% bought in and are leading by example, so that people who may not be right now aligned and may not be the best employees almost take it on as like a project to say, like, smother them with kindness, right? You've heard that expression. So like, show them this is who we are. And if there's a behavior you don't like, to try to reinforce what you like, and say, I know you are great. I know you are capable of this, or whatever it is. Like, it's how we speak to people to really show that we believe in them. And I think all of those things start to influence one and the next and the next. So, I just think over time that when you can replace people who are not willing to come along and do that, then you do what you can. But I think it's a process. It really is a process.
I really appreciate what you say there about it being a process and the fact that it takes time, because it absolutely does. And I think one of the things that we see in the attractions industry, and I'm sure in the restaurant industry as well, is that your operational managers will say, I don't have time. You know what I mean? Like, I've got to get somebody out there right now. But if they were kind of doing some of the things you talked about and really focused on that, as a long-term strategy, then their retaining of team members would be sort of their recruiting strategy, right? So I think there's definitely connection there as well.
Exactly. And you were talking about, if you have those people who are not great and you just bring them on anyway, people think, well, it'll just fill the hole. It'll just fill the gap. It's what we need right now to get us through. What I think the question they don't ask is, how many customers are they interacting with that are really getting a sour taste in their mouth because they've come with their family to have this great experience at this park or whatever it is, and then suddenly it's spoiled because someone was really nasty to them, or someone like didn't even care to help them with whatever it is, or maybe they spoke to them a little rudely. Like, there's so many places and ways for that to go wrong. And so you might think that having that person there to do whatever that task is at the moment is better, but actually they could be doing a lot more harm than good.
Mm-hmm. As well as bringing down the morale from other team members as well, when they say, oh, clearly this is what the standard is, therefore I can lower my effort and now match this other employee. So there probably might be situations where maybe it's better to operate understaffed or at lower efficiency, knowing it's a poorer experience, knowing it's the lesser of two evils, and in certain circumstances. And like you said, it's situational, and it might change from company to company and circumstance.
Yeah. And to build on that, I think, communication, coming back to communication, there we are again. I personally think it's better to work from, with a lower number of staff, and explain that to your customers and say, we have a standard that we want to serve you with, and we are sorry that right now we are understaffed, and we're doing what we can. What else can we do to make it better? So throw in a little something else, so it's kind of sweetens the pot. But honestly, we had this happen immediately after COVID across all of these industries. And I think people were very understanding, and they would wait, and they're like, but half the restaurant's empty. Well, we don't have enough staff to do that. And we don't want to just sit you down. We want to make sure you get great service. So I'm like, okay, cool. I am totally fine to wait a little bit longer. And so I think if we explain that to people, in the attraction space or in any space where you've got that service business model going on, I think people are really understanding. And if you communicate to them and creating the expectation, this is another huge thing that I preach about all the time. And, I call it expectations management. I think that's where we go wrong across the board with our employees and our customers. And without that expectations management, people are going to be projecting what they think onto a scenario, or expectations of how they're supposed to work. Like, you said with the employee, if other employees see that there's someone there that's not pulling their weight, they're going to think, oh, well, I guess this is what management's okay with. So then why do I need to put in the extra work? Why do I need to go above and beyond? And so I think we owe it to them to set that standard and the respect and to communicate, this is the level of service we are as our company. And we are not willing to jeopardize that. We are not willing to negotiate on giving you any less than what we know that you deserve. And I think people would appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, and I think employees would really appreciate that, and that's honestly a conversation that I don't hear managers talking about having very often, right? If they would say from the amusement park perspective, if we have to have a ride closed or something, or if we have to have a food stand closed or something like that, it's because we're quote unquote short staffed. Okay, well, why are we short staffed? Well, there's a million reasons for it, but part of it is because we had, 50 people apply and none of them met our standards. So it's much better for us in our opinion to have everything else that we can open and have that at 100% staffing levels, have great team members out there. Yeah, there's one or two things a guest may not be available for, but now we're also reiterating to our staff, these are our standards. And you better be holding those team members accountable for the standards that you're expecting from them. But that's really a great message, I think, to your team to say, this is the standard and you're meeting it. And we want to make sure that everybody else does. And we haven't found anybody else that's going to run that area. So we're not going to open it. That's a very strong message to send to your team.
Yeah.
100%. And it's so respectful. And I think people would say, wow, okay. One, they recognize me for my effort. I'm here doing what I want. They're appreciating that. And they're not going to bring on anyone else that's going to then expect me to pick up their work as well as mine. Not that we don't support each other, right? It's teamwork, it's collaboration. Of course, we have each other's back, but we're not expected to do something because someone else is falling short. To me, that's the difference when you're all in there with that same attitude. And I agree 100%. And I think once you do that, employees will be proud and they will be willing to even go above and beyond at that point, even more than before.
Yeah. I like you said, it's respectful because it's respectful to the existing team that you have, even though it might be, smaller than the team that you want to have. It's respectful to the guest because you're telling them you're not lowering your standard. I also think it's respectful to the employees that you're not hiring because you're not doing anyone a disservice. It's a disservice to that individual who doesn't meet, your values as well. If it's a bad situation, it's a waste of everybody's time, including that employee that perhaps shouldn't have been hired in the first place. Speaking of standards, throughout the attractions industry, definitely throughout all service industries, the last 4-5 years since pandemic compared to pre-pandemic, the demand for higher wages is just accelerating substantially. And one of the ways that I've been looking at it and kind of talking to people and say, well, if your wages are growing substantially for your frontline team because of just the standards being raised in the industry, shouldn't that mean that the standards should also be raised for employee job duties and what's expected from them? And I would love your thought process on that of kind of straightforward. If we're paying them X% more, we should expect X% more from them in terms of now what's included in their roles.
So it's, again, one of those things that it's hard to answer because it's broad, right? Like what are the current job expectations? What are the current tasks? What is the current salary? Are they making a wage that someone can live on to start with, right? There's so many things to consider with that. Looking at it broadly, I think it's normally expected, as you said, if you're going to get a raise that you have more responsibilities. I think we have to consider what is it that this person is already doing and responsible for? How many people are they responsible for? How many people are being impacted by their position and what they're doing? And can they handle more and still perform at the level we expect of them to get the results that we want for our employees and for our customers, right? At the end of the day. And so I think a lot of times, especially as people were not wanting to come back into, on site and different circumstances, finding the right people post pandemic, I think the norm was, well, either cut costs by cutting employees and we'll just give that person work to someone else, right? But like, we're still just one person. There's only so much we could do. There's so many hours in the day. Having said that, there's a great expression: when you want something done and done well, you give it to a busy person. Right? Not just necessarily someone, they've got a lot of time on their plate. Well, they probably have a lot of time because they're probably not very efficient and very good at what they're doing. But when someone's busy, they're usually, implies, that expression implies that they're driven, they're motivated, they are responsible. And so if they're going to take it on, then they know it's something that they can accomplish. They're not going to do it unless they know they do it well. And that's a certain type of work ethic, I think, that comes with that. I think we have to look at living wages and we have to look at cost of inflation. I don't think you can, take it out of context. And so it's easy to say, well, we're giving you more work. And so we're giving you more money. So therefore you should take on more work. There's just so many variables. It's really hard to give a blanket answer to that. I do think the expectation is logical, but I don't think it's one that can be answered across the board with the blanket yes or no, because I think there's just, you have to look at all those pieces that I mentioned before.
And I'll share a quick anecdote about that. One of the employers that I was working with, they were going to raise wages across the board for everybody. And their expectation was, we're going to pay them more, so they're going to provide better service to the guests, right? But the problem was there was no additional communication. There was no additional raising of expectations.
I knew that's
exactly what you're talking about. And so they were dumbfounded when they raised the wages, and a couple of months later, they're like, we're not really getting any better results from them. So I totally hear what you're saying, and I think there's so much more that goes into it than just the pay rate. But one thing I'd like to get your input on, because you've touched on this a couple of times, is hiring people that match your values, right? And I love the fact that you're talking about this because it's something I truly believe in as well. But I think some people would struggle with that. First of all, you have to have values, right, at your business, whatever that may be. But then let's say that somebody's value at their place of business is respect. So from your perspective, how do you judge someone in an interview or in the application process to see if they have respect? I'm just curious what kind of tips you have that interviewers can take that say, okay, this is how I can see if they actually meet our values or align with our values.
Can I just comment quickly on the last thing you were saying and then come back to that?
Sure.
I think other than just giving your employees more money, I think a better way that's a win-win for the employer and the employee is to show that you're investing in their growth, in them, both as whole people, whether it's a kind of an adjunct to their skills that they're going to be applying, like in the restaurant industry, and teaching them about wines, so maybe they want to get their license in something. That would be something they could take on to some other job. But at the same time, it's educating them on something that may or may not be able to be used in the workplace. But when you invest in them, and part of that investment also is like training them communication skills, training them emotional intelligence, like things that are skills that build them as a person, but also makes them a better employee and a better teammate. So I think there's other ways to spend money on them without just giving it to them, without teaching them how to grow as an employee and as a person.
Love that.
So values. How do we know? There's the old, which I think is standby, but always a good one, role playing, right? I think testing something out with role playing, give them a scenario, not just if you were in this situation, because you also want to get information about their past. How do they speak to each other? How do they respond? Do they react or do they respond? There's a big difference between those two. And say to them, when this scenario happened, how did you handle it? Would you have done X or Y, based on your values? Like, go ahead and have a specific set of questions or case study type situations and ask them, have you ever had this happen? Or when this has happened to you, how did you handle it? If this were going to happen, what would you do? And then you can tell how their response is going to be. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't be taught. Of course, you don't make, I wouldn't believe that you make a judgment 100% based on that, because I do believe that you look to see, you ask very specific questions, and I can't think of any right in this moment, but I've written some for people, where you're really going for, you can see their character, right? You can see how they feel truly about serving other people, not just that I'm getting paid, so I'm going to go do whatever I have to do. Like, how much is it really a part of that hospitality gene that they have in them or not? And I think they're just, and then maybe also do a trial, right? A couple weeks, a month, whatever it is, have them shadow other people, and then have a team meeting and let everyone give you input, because they're going to end up being a part of that team, and say to everyone, okay, what was your experience with this person? What kind of, reactions did they have? What kind of language was it? What was your vibe? And again, it's just one element. I wouldn't make a decision completely on that, but it's just gathering more and more information that you can. And the more information you have about someone and in all these different scenarios, I think gives you a clue. Do they have the same aligned values that we have? And I think you tell them, I mean, to me, you're telling your recruiters, you're telling everyone who touches your business, they should know, both through example and through the language that you use in your company, that they understand what your culture is and what your values are that create that culture.
Fascinating. So you mentioned one thing in there, and I know we only have a few minutes left, but you said there's a difference between react and respond. And I'm curious, would love to know what the difference is.
Sure. So when we react to something, it's usually off the cuff, it's quick. We don't even know it's happening. Our brain responds with a nanosecond based on a past experience that we've had in our life. It's completely subconscious. It's an immediate emotional reaction, where a response, the nuance of the response is generally we take a moment, we think about what they said, we even maybe give some benefit to what's happened that day, maybe just before this incident just happened, maybe what's happened in their life beforehand, like coming at it from an emotionally intelligent perspective, real person to person, giving them the benefit of the doubt, and then responding to whatever it is that's happened, and not just a quick emotional off the cuff response that usually is a knee-jerk reaction that comes from things that were just even in our subconscious, not even aware of how we respond.
Yeah. As Josh said, we're running a little low on time, but there is one other question that I definitely want to ask before we let you go, and that has to do with all this stuff we've been talking about with employee engagement and employee experience that absolutely leads to a better guest experience. There are going to be some people out there who say, show me the numbers. Show me how the return on investment of investing. I love that word that you used, investing in your team to create a better guest experience, and that creates better profit. So what's that formula that you're able to share with people in order to make the case that this is the right way to go?
Well, there are ways to gather information on whether it's more sales, whether it's a reduction of time, and it could be by management, or it could be out by your employees directly, in a park, in whatever situation is. There are ways to look at all the different, line items of things that are costing you, to then say, okay, if we now introduce more of the human element into these things, if we provide ways to hear what someone is saying, or to engage with someone, empower them to be able to make decisions, to engage directly with that customer, to solve the problem for our guest that comes to the park, empower them. And then I think, number one, you're going to see your employee satisfaction rise tremendously, and your customers as well, because they don't have to wait around for someone else higher up to make the change or the decision, or likely in a park environment is never going to happen, right? Because it's in the moment, they're on to the next ride. They're hungry, their kid needs to go to the bathroom, whatever it is. So I think empowering your people, when you do this, there are ways to track through. One of the things that I do, I always look at that. And for example, I worked with this restaurant. It was during the pandemic, problem with sales, turnover was insane, could not get people in there. And we talked about all kinds of various things. And even with that, through their sales increased 20%. A lot of their costs kind of were impacted. And you could just see that. And I said, so where do you think the change was? And she said, we are really trying to implement the things that you've taught us around culture, that we're really focusing on our people first. And I think every time you do that, it's the safest bet in your business, is to focus and invest in your people, because it will ultimately you're going to see that in your customer experience. Your leading indicator of your employee experience and your employee turnover, your employee satisfaction, all of those areas will be leading indicators of what you're going to probably find to be parallel in your customer experience, your customer satisfaction, et cetera.
That is excellent advice right there, and I think a great way to really sum up this entire conversation right here. Jill, this has been so fascinating, and I feel like this went by so quickly as well. If people want to learn more about you, if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
My website, jillraff.com, and my last name is Raff, R like Ronald, A like apple pie, and double F like French fry, of course. JillRaff.com, and feel free to write me directly. I really love and embrace and welcome any opportunity to speak to people directly about what's going on with them. And it's just Jill@JillRaff.com, straightforward. So whether through the website or just to me directly, that's the best way. And LinkedIn's my main social app. And so you can find me on LinkedIn. And I think there, you could Google my name as well, but it's EX2CX. So like playing on the B2B, B2C business. So EX2CX advisor. You can find me that way as well.
Excellent. So we'll make sure all of those are in the show notes so people can click on them and get in touch with you really, really quickly. So Jill, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really love the fact that, there's so many parallels to what you have experienced, and especially in the restaurant industry, and we can apply all that to the attractions industry. So thank you so much for your time. And for everybody out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros. Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release, and even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit attractionpros.com.